All right, what's up, everybody? As promised, here is your next short video on energy sources. As I mentioned in the previous video, we're going to learn a little bit more about different ways that we generate electricity, some of the pros and cons of each of those different sources. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to introduce to you what your assignment is going to be for me next week, but you don't actually have to start that yet. So let's just get into it, okay? So as I mentioned in the previous video, there are several different ways that we generate electricity. There are non-renewable sources, things like coal, natural gas, and oil. Those are referred to as fossil fuels. Once those are used, they're gone, right? So once you burn coal, you have to go get more, etc., etc. Some of the more common renewable sources are really the first four. All of these get used to a certain extent, but the four that we're going to focus on today are solar, wind, hydro, and geothermal. So I'm going to go through sort of one by one of each of these and tell you some pros and cons. You'll have access to these slides as well. And then, like I said, towards the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what your responsibilities will be with nuclear power. Okay, so fossil fuels. I'm lumping coal, oil, and natural gas sort of all together when I talk about fossil fuels. Some of the positive things about them, they are relatively cheap in terms of generating electricity. So it's relatively cheap for us to use fossil fuels. They are relatively abundant for the time being, although that may not be the case forever. We have a well-established infrastructure for using fossil fuels, and they are not reliant on climate or weather, so they can be used all over the world, no matter where you live, or no matter what the weather is like. The cons, burning fossil fuels, or really burning anything, produces carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas that leads to global warming and ultimately climate change. So that process has been, steadily ramping up over the last 150 years. And so the continued use of fossil fuels is only going to, produce more and more carbon dioxide, sort of furthering that problem. You can also get other toxic pollutants from burning these things, specifically coal and oil. And at the end of the day, it is unsustainable. We are eventually going to run out. Okay, it's probably not going to be, in the next 10 years, or maybe not even in the next 50 years, but at some point, we will run out of these resources. We cannot generate these artificially. So at one point, we will run out of them. There's not going to be any left for us to dig up or to pump out of the earth. They will be all gone at some point. Okay, so moving into the renewable resources, our first one here is solar. So obviously a big pro for solar is that it is sustainable and renewable. It produces no pollutants or carbon dioxide. The cost of solar power has been coming down steadily over the last few years, and it can be used in remote locations, like in desert areas. That's actually one of the best places for it. Negative things about solar power, obviously it only works during the daytime when the sun is out. If you want to utilize solar power overnight, you need some sort of battery system for sustained use. It works a lot better at lower latitudes, meaning close to the equator or closer to the equator, further south, right, for us in the northern hemisphere. And it cannot really be used efficiently at higher altitudes, like closer to the poles, like the North Pole. You need really direct sunlight in order for solar power to work well. So, that results in solar power not getting a lot of use, even in places like Kentucky. There is some solar power, but it's just, much further north than Kentucky, solar power doesn't work as well, and isn't really worth the cost. And another negative thing about solar power is that it does use quite a bit of land area, a lot more than a traditional power plant does to produce the same amount of electricity. So you can't, if you live in a city, right, Perhaps you can put solar power outside of the city and channel the electricity in, but you can't just have a big solar field in the middle of a city, right? So that's a downside. Wind power, some of the same pros, okay? In fact, really all of the same pros. It's sustainable, renewable, no pollutants, no carbon dioxide. The cost has been coming down a bit over the past few years, and it can be used in remote locations. Once again, sort of desert areas. It can be used on farmland, since it doesn't actually take up as much land. It's just the turbine which stands upright. Obvious cons: it only works when the wind is blowing. It can be loud and unsightly. These wind turbines do require routine maintenance, which you can imagine is kind of dangerous, right, and expensive. And it can be somewhat of a threat to wildlife, killing birds and that sort of thing. Although if you compare the number of birds that die to wind turbines, if you compare that to the number of birds that die to cats, cats kill like way more birds than wind turbines ever will. Okay, so when I say it's a threat to wildlife, it's not a huge threat to wildlife, but it is something to think about. Okay, moving forward, hydroelectric power. Some similar pros here. It's sustainable, renewable. You don't have any pollution to worry about. Hydroelectric power actually can be used as a constant source of electricity, unlike solar and wind. We build these things called dams. Okay, we have a lot of these in Kentucky. Dams don't necessarily have to be super large in order to generate electricity. And so the water can sort of flow through the dam and generate electricity day round, year round, right? It doesn't rely on sunlight or wind. It obviously can't be used in certain climates. If there's no water or no rivers nearby, then you can't use this. Another downside of hydroelectric power is that we've pretty much maxed out our hydroelectric capacity on Earth. So most of the places where you could use hydroelectric power, where we are already doing that. So you can't really expand the use of this any more than we already have. And then one other thing is that obviously whenever you dam up a river, you are sort of negatively interacting with the aquatic ecosystem there. So it is harmful to the wildlife in those cases. Okay, and then our last resource that we're going to talk about is geothermal. This is a bit complicated to understand, but basically geothermal power uses the sort of base temperature of the Earth to generate electricity. Okay, and in some cases not to generate electricity, but just to reduce heating and cooling costs for buildings and homes. So it's a bit complicated, but long story short, it is sustainable and renewable. You're not going to have any pollution going along with geothermal. This right here that you're seeing, this is just steam. Okay, this is not smoke or anything like that. It can be very expensive to install a geothermal system in a house, for example, but it is cheap to operate. And it can be used as a constant source of electricity in some areas, but not most. So this gets a lot of use in places like Hawaii and Iceland, where you have like volcanic activity, very hot spots on the Earth's surface where you've got lots of volcanic activity. That's where you can use it as a constant source of electricity. In places like Kentucky, where we don't have volcanic activity, mainly geothermal is used for like heating and cooling. Okay, and in this case it's not really used to generate electricity, it's just to aid your heating and cooling costs, or sort of lower your heating and cooling costs by aiding your HVAC systems. Okay, anyways, a bit complicated, but that's enough there. Okay, so what is your assignment going to be? First of all, we're not going to be starting this until next week. I promise it's not going to take that long. It is going to be a summative grade because this is sort of it's a mini project. Okay, so it is going to be a summative grade that you're going to work on for me next week. You're going to be putting together a Google Slides presentation on nuclear power. Okay, so you're going to have to do a little bit of research about this on your own. You're going to put together some slides talking about the pros and cons of nuclear power, sort of similar to what you saw in this presentation. And then you are actually going to be taking a side. You're going to be either arguing for or against the use of nuclear power in the United States, okay? And you're going to use some of the pros and cons that you researched to sort of back up your position, all right? I'm going to give you a complete rubric on Monday or Tuesday, whichever day I happen to see you. Just as a quick reminder here, well, if you're watching this, you already know this, okay? We do not have class Thursday and Friday. I'm out of town. So you're supposed to be watching this on Thursday or Friday, and then I will see you in class next week where we will discuss more about your assignment, okay? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.